Donkey Kong Bonanza is finally out, and it's time to look at what the credits tell us about the current state of the 3D Mario team, Entertainment Planning and Development Production Group 8. I still have had relatively little time to play Bonanza myself, and while I'm having an amazing time with the title, I'd appreciate for myself personally, and let alone anybody else, if we could keep any comments in this video spoiler-free as much as possible. However, thanks to the fantastic people at the Nintendo Wiki who have transcribed the credits, it is possible to do a deep dive and see exactly what seems to be happening at EPD 8. Now, a word on this kind of analysis generally. Nintendo does have a high turnover for some aspects of their staff. It's not uncommon for there to be people brought in to work on games for short periods from Bandai Namco, Monolith Soft, Toze or others, and there seem to be staff members who are frequently seconded to whatever major title is drawing a lot of development energy at any one moment. Therefore, what I'm really interested in is the senior development team and what's changed between Donkey Kong Bonanza compared with Super Mario Odyssey. Having said all that, there are complexities here, and that's because of Donkey Kong Bonanza's oddly distended development. As far as we can tell, the challenge of doing Donkey Kong came down from Yoshiaki Koizumi sometime before 2020, and a Switch version was well underway, but director Kazuya Takahashi came aboard around this time and seems to have been responsible for scaling up the project to be a Switch 2 title. This means that the development spans some major changes at EPD 8. First, we know that Odyssey director Kenta Motokura is the producer and credited also as the senior director on Donkey Kong Bonanza. Moving into a producer role makes him closer in stature to Eiji Aonuma or Kosuke Ibuki of the Mario Kart team, able to commission and be across multiple projects at once, and in this sense it seems that he has effectively taken the place in EPD 8 of Yoshiaki Koizumi, who since 2023 has been number 2 in EPD to Shinya Takahashi, and I doubt has had much day-to-day hands-on management of game development any longer. Certainly, despite apparently asking for the team to work on Donkey Kong, he has no credit on Donkey Kong Bonanza whatsoever. What is curious is that Yusaku Yamanaka is credited as an interim director, perhaps suggesting that Yamanaka was the director before Takahashi joined and then moved on, perhaps indeed, to developing the next Mario. Another likely person to now be focused on Mario is planning director for Odyssey, Futoshi Shirai. Shirai is credited on Bonanza, but with the more tangential sounding role of level design support, and is credited at the bottom of the list alongside Shinya Hiratake, the creator of the diorama Captain Toad levels and director of the Captain Toad and 3D World titles. It feels likely to me that Hiratake could have his own team developing a title, although it could be a different title besides the next 3D Mario. For example, if Super Mario Galaxy 2 were to return as a more major and expanded affair, perhaps with a Plus game, he might be an ideal candidate for developing it, perhaps alongside Yuka Kitahara, who was the lead level designer for Captain Toad and also has no credit at all on Donkey Kong Bonanza. Another option could be another Captain Toad game or something else which is a smaller side project. Of course, one reason for the lack of such a credit for Kitahara could simply be that she left the company. Such is definitely the case with Odyssey level designer Hiroaki Hishinuma, who left in 2019. There are also people like Yosuke Nodama, who moved over to work as a planner on Mario Kart World, while Odyssey level designer Seiichi Takahashi seems not to have received any credit since Super Mario Odyssey whatsoever. The further we go into Odyssey's team, beyond the most senior people, the more divergence we actually find between the Bonanza credits and the Odyssey credits. Emiko Yanai worked on script support and return for Bonanza, but she seems to have also supported on other script content since Odyssey for many games, including Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and most impressively of all, Advance Wars Dual Strike. Sho Murata is the interim art director for Bonanza, but was the lead artist on Super Mario Odyssey. Most of the art teams seem to be pulling double duty, but this isn't uncommon in Nintendo developed games. With Animal Crossing and Splatoon, both series which were developed by EPG5, they shared art and music staff to quite a large degree, while the core development groups were almost entirely separate except at the most senior level. Therefore, it's perhaps more of a surprise that less than half the Odyssey artists have actually moved over to Bananza. A lot of the team seem to be new at this point, and this perhaps suggests the precise point of divergence when the Bananza team started to separate out from the Odyssey development group. Now, so far I've been analysing things from the perspective of Odyssey, but let's also look at Bananza's credits in their own right. What's noticeable is that the planning team are almost all from Odyssey, certainly at the senior level, but a lot of people have come in from outside for level design support, and the art team is far more diverse. Now, what does all this seem to show? First of all, there are senior people who haven't turned up to Bananza. This includes people associated with Captain Toad and 3D World, making the possibility of another title in that series or another smaller venture, Super Mario Galaxy 2 and a Plus game, seem plausible. However, Futoshi Shirai is one of the heirs apparent for the director slot on Mario, and I think is very likely to be leading the new Mario games development, either as a producer or as a director. Beyond that, the senior team are mostly credited for the core concept of Donkey Kong Bonanza, which seems to have been locked in as of around 2019, although of course it was scaled up for Switch 2. From this point, it seems that a largely new team, supported by a good deal of the Odyssey art staff, took the project to completion. What became then of the rest of the developers? It seems possible to me that if the destruction mechanic was originally an idea that could have been attached to an Odyssey sequel, and venturing into the centre of the world as opposed to travelling across it does feel very Odyssey in style, then this concept would have been shelved sometime in 2018 and 2019, and at that time the team would have needed to look at a new Mario project, a generational leap title, while the content that could have been Odyssey 2 was repurposed as the Donkey Kong game. Bowser's Fury could then have been an example of the team trying out an idea for a future Mario game, just to test the waters to see what could work. By 2020, that title would have been finishing up, while the Bonanza development team was being spun off and presented as a Switch 2 project with the arrival of Takahashi. This makes it likely that both Donkey Kong and Mario were ready to gear up into full development, and at this point, the team split. I would suggest that despite the bias of these credits, it's likely that most of the senior staff stuck with Mario simply because the core concept of Donkey Kong Bonanza had already been mapped out in the Switch version, and so it was a case of supervising a broadly new team as they got up to speed with what was being developed. From 2021, the interim project leads would have been able to head over to the new Mario game, leaving behind the team under Takahashi to take Donkey Kong Bonanza to the finish line. Therefore, if development of the new Mario really cranked up after a few false starts by the latest 2020, that game could be 5 years into development by now. It's very likely that the Donkey Kong Bonanza staff could have been reabsorbed by the main team as and when their affiliations with Bonanza finished. This is broadly how the Animal Crossing and Splatoon teams, or the Pikmin and Super Mario Bros. Teams, operated. By 2024, when Bonanza should have been mostly finished bar testing and tweaks, reports from early test play experiences suggest the game was still being refined, but I'd be surprised if they needed the entire staff for this effort, even though admittedly Eiji Aonuma claimed to draft the whole Tears of the Kingdom staff into bug testing that game. However, by this time, the groundwork for the new Mario game should be well and truly mapped out, and so the main need presumably would be the art team, the testing team, and the programming of new enemies and NPCs within the framework already laid down, meaning the newly expanded EPT-8 team would be able to fully focus on the new title. I doubt there will be space for much else, although as I say, I do think there is a Yuka Kitahara shaped hole that may be better explained by a smaller project such as Galaxy 2 or Captain Toad 2. And by the way, the Switch Captain Toad and 3D World had support from Nintendo Software Technology, who might be ideal candidates to support the development here and give EPD8 a little more muscle. So, is there a new Donkey Kong team or not? The answer seems to be sorta if you squint a bit, because it seems to me that they did build a bespoke team around Donkey Kong Bonanza, and Motokura's comments in the Ask the Developer interview, which I deep dived previously, indicate that 3D and 2D Donkey Kong are going to be a regular thing, or at least that is the ambition. But I also think the level of integration between this team and the Odyssey team suggests that we're closer to the kind of situation we saw a decade ago with Animal Crossing and Splatoon, or Super Mario Bros. And Pikmin. There may be some different core people, but the teams are still heavily interdependent at the moment. My guess is that Takahashi and some core people will section themselves off and start working on concepts for a post-Bonanza Donkey Kong. At the time that the next Mario finishes, I suspect the hope will be that the team can transition back to a new Donkey Kong, and at that point Motokura may be able to start hiring to expand the team for a Mario for the 2030s. However, another 3D Donkey Kong seems likely to be a long way off. I'd say only a 10% chance for this current decade. If you enjoy this kind of content, there's a lot of early access and exclusive content on the Patreon. I'd really appreciate if you like, share, comment, and subscribe. But otherwise, I'm just glad you're here, and I look forward to seeing you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.